Transfer him to Denver. Forge signature ready.
The wrench slipped from my grease-stained fingers as I heard my wife's laughter drift through the garage window. It wasn't her usual polite chuckle, the one she used at corporate dinners when someone told a joke that wasn't funny. This was genuine amusement, the kind that made my stomach twist, because I knew it was at someone else's expense. Moving men around like chess pieces is easier than I thought, Vivian's voice carried clearly through the October air. Adrian still thinks he's getting a promotion. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I froze beneath my Ford F-150, oil dripping onto my forehead. The garage suddenly felt smaller, the familiar smell of motor oil and rust turning sour in my nostrils. "You're terrible, Viv," came the reply. That was Talia, Vivian's younger sister. Her voice held that same cruel edge I'd grown to recognize over the past year. Filing those HR papers was almost too easy. He actually believes the company requested the transfer. My heart hammered against my ribs. Transfer? What transfer? The best part is watching him try to act grateful, Vivian continued. Like he's lucky to be attached to someone with my connections, which, let's face it, he is. I rolled out from under the truck, my hands shaking as I wiped them on an old rag. Through the window, I could see them sitting on the back porch, wine glasses catching the last rays of sunset. Vivian looked stunning, as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled even after a long day at the office, her business suit immaculate. Talia sat beside her, dark-haired and sharp-featured, scrolling through her phone with that perpetual smirk. "What about Mike?" Talia asked, taking a sip of wine. "He's excited about the Charlotte opportunity?" "Mike knows a good thing when he sees it," Vivian replied. "With Adrian out of the picture, we'll have complete freedom. No more sneaking around, no more careful scheduling." The wrench fell from my numb fingers, clattering against the concrete floor. Mike Donnelly. I should have known. Vivian's business consultant had been around more and more lately, always finding reasons to stop by the house, always touching Vivian's arm just a little too long during their conversations. I stood there in my garage, surrounded by the tools and projects that had always been my refuge, feeling like the biggest fool in Charlotte, North Carolina. 39 years old, and I'd been played like a complete amateur. The next morning, I sat at my desk at Mountain States Logistics, staring at the official-looking document that had appeared in my inbox. Relocation order, Denver, Colorado. Effective immediately. My signature was at the bottom, though I had no memory of signing anything. "Congratulations, Blake." Tommy Rodriguez from accounting slapped me on the back. "Denver's a great city, cold as hell, but great opportunities." I looked around the office. Everyone was smiling at me with that mixture of pity and relief people get when they're glad it's not happening to them. They all knew before I did. The humiliation burned in my chest like acid. "When did I sign this?" I asked our supervisor, Janet Mills. She looked confused. "Last Tuesday. Your wife brought it by personally. Said you were too busy with the Henderson account to come yourself." Of course she did. Vivian had access to everything, my schedule, my projects, even my signature from years of joint tax returns and mortgage documents. "There must be some mistake," I started, but Janet was already shaking her head. "It's all processed, Adrian. Your replacement starts Monday. We've already arranged your farewell lunch for Friday." I drove home through Charlotte's afternoon traffic, my mind racing. The city I'd called home for 15 years suddenly felt foreign. The familiar landmarks, the bank where Vivian worked as CFO, the restaurant where we'd had our first date, the neighborhood where we'd bought our dream house, all of it felt like scenery from someone else's life. Vivian was in the kitchen when I walked in, still in her power suit, preparing what looked like an elaborate dinner. She glanced up with that practiced smile she'd perfected over her years climbing the corporate ladder. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, as if she hadn't orchestrated its destruction. "Interesting," I said, dropping the relocation order on the granite countertop. "Want to explain this?" She barely glanced at it. "Oh, that. I was going to mention it tonight. Mike thinks Denver would be perfect for your skill set. More opportunities in logistics out there." "Mike thinks?" The words came out harder than I intended. Since when does Mike Donnelly make decisions about my career? Vivian's smile faltered for just a moment. "He's been consulting with the company on efficiency improvements. Your name came up as someone who could really benefit from a fresh start." "My name came up," I repeated. "Along with my forged signature?" "Don't be dramatic, Adrian. I'm your wife. I was helping streamline the process." The front door opened, and Talia breezed in like she owned the place. She'd been staying with us for 3 months, supposedly between apartments, but I was starting to suspect this was part of their plan too. "Adrian," she said with fake enthusiasm, "I heard about Denver. How exciting." I looked between the two sisters. Vivian, tall and polished, every inch the successful executive. Talia, shorter but just as sharp, her HR specialist credentials giving her access to all the right forms and procedures. They'd played this perfectly. "You both knew," I said. It wasn't a question. "We're your family," Vivian replied. "Of course we want what's best for you." "What's best for me, or what's most convenient for you and Mike?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Vivian set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. "I don't know what you're implying," she said, but her voice had gone cold and professional. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating it directly. You want me gone so you can play house with your consultant." Talia laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, Adrian, you really think this is about some affair? This is about business, about efficiency, about not holding back people who are actually going places?" The casual cruelty in her voice hit me like a physical blow. I'd never been anything more than an obstacle to them. Not a husband, not a family member, just an inconvenience to be relocated. "You filed the paperwork," I said to Talia. "Used your HR connections to make it look legitimate." She shrugged. "I might have helped facilitate the process. Consider it a favor." "A favor?" I felt something cold and hard settling in my chest. "Right." Vivian stepped closer, her expression softening into what I now recognized as her manipulation mode. "Adrian, you're upset. I understand, but this is really an opportunity, a chance to prove yourself without the complications of our social circle here." "Complications," I repeated. "Is that what I am?" "You're a logistics coordinator," Talia said bluntly. "Vivian is a CFO. Do the math." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. 15 years of marriage reduced to a simple equation of professional worth. I looked around the kitchen, our kitchen, with the cabinets I'd installed myself and the tile work I'd spent 3 weekends perfecting. None of it had ever been mine. I'd just been the handyman, keeping everything running while the real players made their moves. "When do I leave?" I asked. 2 weeks, Vivian said, relief evident in her voice. "Mike has already identified some excellent apartment options in Denver. Very reasonable rent." Of course he had. Mike probably had my whole new life planned out, right down to which grocery store I'd shop at. That night, I lay in bed listening to Vivian's breathing, wondering how long this had been in the works. Months? Years? Had she ever loved me, or had I always been just a placeholder until something better came along? My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. "Looking forward to working more closely with Vivian once you're settled in Denver. Thanks for being so understanding about the transition. M. Mike." The bastard was gloating. I deleted the message and stared at the ceiling, feeling something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and fresh, but underneath it was something else. something colder and more focused. They thought they were so clever, moving their chess pieces around the board, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I'd go quietly. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Instead of heading to the office, I drove to Grind Coffee, a place downtown where I knew Vivian never went, too blue-collar for her refined tastes. I needed space to think, away from the house that no longer felt like home. Derek Lawson was already there, hunched over his laptop in the corner booth. My best friend since high school looked up when I approached, his ex-cop instincts immediately picking up on my mood. "You look like hell," he said, closing his laptop. "What's wrong?" I told him everything. The overheard conversation, the forged signature, Mike Donnelly, the whole elaborate scheme. Derek listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each detail. "Jesus, Adrian," he said when I finished. "That's cold, even for corporate types." Derek owned a boxing gym now, having left the Charlotte Police Department 5 years ago after a corruption scandal he'd refused to be part of. He understood betrayal, understood what it felt like when people you trusted used that trust against you. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Fight it, I guess. Get a lawyer, contest the transfer." Derek shook his head. "That'll take months, maybe years, and they've covered their tracks. Forged signature aside, they've probably got documentation showing you requested this." He was right. Vivian was too smart to leave obvious loose ends. "So I just roll over? Let them win?" "I didn't say that." Derek leaned forward, his voice dropping. "But if you're going to fight back, you need to be smart about it. Emotional reactions get you nowhere except in trouble." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you need to think like they do. Strategic, long-term." He paused. "And you need to accept that the Adrian Blake who trusted his wife is gone. The question is, who do you want to be now?" I spent the rest of the day driving around Charlotte, seeing the city with new eyes. Every familiar street corner felt like a crime scene now, a place where I'd been living a lie without knowing it. When I got home that evening, Vivian was hosting a dinner party. I could hear voices and laughter from the living room as I entered through the garage. Our friends, really Vivian's colleagues and social connections, were gathered around the dining room table I'd assembled from IKEA 3 years ago. "Adrian!" Vivian called out with artificial brightness. "Perfect timing. We were just talking about your big adventure." I walked into the dining room and surveyed the scene. 8 people around the table, all of them dressed like they'd stepped out of a business magazine. And there, sitting in what used to be my chair, was Mike Donnelly. Mike was everything I wasn't. 6 feet tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He stood when he saw me, extending his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Adrian, congratulations on the Denver opportunity. I hear it's a fantastic position." I looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then walked past him to the kitchen without acknowledging it. The conversation behind me died to an uncomfortable whisper. I grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and leaned against the counter, listening to them try to restart their small talk. Through the doorway, I could see Mike had taken my absence as an opportunity to move closer to Vivian, his hand resting casually on the back of her chair. "Adrian." Talia appeared in the kitchen doorway, her expression a mixture of annoyance and concern. "You're being rude." "Am I?" "These people are here to wish you well. The least you could do is be gracious." I took a long drink of beer, studying my sister-in-law. She was wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's car payments, her hair and makeup perfect. She looked successful, confident, completely in control. "Tell me something, Talia," I said. "When you were filing those HR papers, did it occur to you that you were destroying someone's life?" Her expression hardened. "I was solving a problem. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions." "A problem," I repeated. "That's what I am to you?" "You're a good man, Adrian, but you're not ambitious. You're not driven. You're content to fix trucks and coordinate shipping routes while the world moves past you. And that makes me disposable? She sighed, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. It makes you incompatible with where Vivian is going in her career. She needs a partner who can match her energy, her vision. Someone like Mike. Someone like Mike, she agreed. I nodded slowly, setting down my beer. I see. And you? What do you get out of this arrangement? I get to see my sister happy. I get to know she's not being held back by someone who doesn't understand her potential. The casual viciousness of it was breathtaking. They'd dissected my marriage like a business merger, weighing assets and liabilities, determining that I was a net loss. Well, I said, I appreciate your honesty. Talia looked surprised, like she'd expected more of a fight. So you understand? This isn't personal, Adrian. It's just practical. Oh, I understand perfectly. I walked back into the dining room, where the conversation stopped again. 8 faces turned toward me, all of them wearing expressions of polite sympathy. They knew. All of them knew what was happening, and none of them saw anything wrong with it. Sorry to interrupt, I said. I just wanted to thank everyone for their support during this transition. Vivian beamed at me, probably thinking I'd accepted my fate. That's so sweet, honey. Especially you, Mike, I continued, looking directly at him. I hear you've been very involved in planning my future. Mike's smile became strained, just trying to help where I can. Of course, and I'm sure you'll continue helping once I'm gone. Vivian's going to need all the support she can get. The double meaning wasn't lost on anyone. I could see the discomfort rippling around the table, people suddenly finding their wine glasses very interesting. Adrian, Vivian said, a warning note in her voice. What? I'm just expressing my gratitude. After all, it's not every day you find people willing to go so far out of their way for your benefit. I excused myself and went upstairs, leaving them to salvage what they could of their dinner party. From my bedroom window, I watched Mike's BMW in the driveway, memorizing the license plate. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Vivian had retreated to her home office for urgent work, I sat in the garage with my laptop. I'd always been good with computers, a necessity in modern logistics, but I'd never used those skills for anything more interesting than tracking shipments. Tonight was different. I started with Mike Donnelly. Social media profiles, business registration, property records. The man had a surprisingly large digital footprint for someone who supposedly valued privacy. Within an hour, I had his home address, his ex-wife's name, and a list of his business associates. More interesting was what I found about his relationship with Vivian's company. Mike's consulting firm had received 3 major contracts in the past year, all of them approved by Vivian's department. The timing was suspicious. The first contract dated to about 6 months after I'd first noticed him hanging around. I dug deeper, cross-referencing dates and dollar amounts. A pattern emerged, one that painted a picture of a relationship that was as much about business as it was about romance. Mike wasn't just stealing my wife, he was profiting from it. By 3 a.m, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Mike Donnelly and his business dealings. Some of it was probably innocent, some of it definitely wasn't. I saved everything to an encrypted drive and hid it in my toolbox. Then I went to bed, lying next to my wife and listening to her breathe, wondering if she had any idea what she'd started. They wanted to play games with my life? Fine. But they'd picked the wrong opponent. I might just be a logistics coordinator, but I understood supply chains, pressure points, and how to move things from one place to another without anyone noticing, including information. The farewell lunch was scheduled for Friday at Bentley's, an upscale restaurant downtown that Vivian had chosen. I arrived early and took a seat at the bar, nursing a Coke and watching the lunch crowd filter in. My soon-to-be former colleagues trickled in over the next 20 minutes, all of them wearing the slightly uncomfortable expressions of people attending a funeral for someone they didn't know very well. Janet Mills, my supervisor, had reserved a large table in the back. She'd worked with me for 8 years, and I could see the confusion in her eyes. She knew this whole situation didn't make sense, but corporate politics weren't her strong suit. "Adrian," she said, pulling me aside before we sat down. "I have to ask, are you sure about this move? Because if there's any pressure, any reason you feel like you can't speak freely?" I appreciated the concern, but what could I tell her? That my wife had orchestrated my removal so she could sleep with her business partner without complications. That my sister-in-law had used her HR connections to forge documents. "It's complicated, Janet," I said, "but I'm handling it." She nodded, but I could see she wasn't satisfied with the answer. The lunch was exactly as awkward as I'd expected. Forced conversation, half-hearted jokes about Colorado winters, and a gift card to Home Depot that someone had clearly picked up that morning. I smiled and played along, but my mind was elsewhere. Mike Donnelly was having lunch 3 tables away. He wasn't alone. Across from him sat a woman I recognized from Vivian's company, Linda Chen, the head of procurement. They were deep in conversation, papers spread between them on the table. Every few minutes Mike would glance over at our group, checking to see if I was watching. I was. After the lunch ended and my colleagues had returned to work, I lingered at the bar. Mike and Linda were still talking, their conversation growing more animated. I couldn't hear the words, but their body language suggested disagreement about something. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "Package delivered to your house. Garage workbench, under the tarp." Perfect timing. I drove home slowly, taking a detour through downtown Charlotte. The city looked different now that I knew I was leaving. Less like home, more like a place I used to live. The change in perspective was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. The house was empty when I arrived. Vivian was at work, and Talia had mentioned something about shopping. I went straight to the garage and found Derek's package under the canvas tarp covering my workbench. It wasn't really a package, just a small digital recorder and a note. Sometimes the best evidence comes from people who think they're safe. D. I pocketed the recorder and went inside to pack. I had 2 weeks before the move, but I wanted to be ready. More importantly, I wanted to document everything I was leaving behind. I started with Vivian's home office. She kept it locked, but I'd installed the door handle myself and still had the spare key. Inside, her filing cabinet contained copies of all our financial documents, insurance policies, and business correspondence. I photographed everything, paying special attention to the contracts with Mike's consulting firm. The amounts were larger than I'd realized, nearly $200,000 over the past year. For a man whose primary qualification seemed to be his ability to charm married women, Mike was doing very well for himself. In the bottom drawer, I found something interesting, a folder labeled Denver Properties. Inside were printouts of apartment listings, all of them circled in red ink. The cheapest options available, all in neighborhoods I'd never choose to live in. They hadn't just planned my exile, they'd planned my poverty. I was photographing the last document when I heard a car in the driveway. I quickly returned everything to its place, locked the office, and made it to the kitchen, just as Talia walked through the front door. "Adrian," she said, seeming surprised to see me. "I thought you'd still be at your lunch." "It ended early," I said. "How was shopping?" She held up several expensive-looking bags. "Productive. I found the perfect dress for Vivian's company party next week." "The one I'm going to miss because I'll be in Denver?" Talia's smile was sharp. "The one you were never invited to anyway. It's for executives and their partners." The casual dismissal stung, but I kept my expression neutral. Of course, wouldn't want to embarrass anyone. "Exactly." She headed upstairs with her bags, then paused on the landing. "Adrian, I know this is hard, but you're handling it well. Vivian and I both appreciate your maturity about the situation." My maturity. Right. That evening, Vivian came home late, claiming she'd been stuck in meetings. She seemed distracted during dinner, checking her phone frequently and giving short answers to my attempts at conversation. Everything okay? I asked. Fine, she said without looking up from her phone. Just some complications with the Henderson contract. The Henderson contract was one of Mike's deals. I wondered what kind of complications they were having. Need any help? I know that account pretty well. No, she said quickly. Mike's handling it. He has some new strategies he wants to try. I'll bet he does. After dinner, I excused myself to the garage, claiming I wanted to organize my tools before the move. Instead, I called Derek. How are you holding up? He asked. Better than expected, I said. I found some interesting financial documents today. Mike's been very well compensated for his consulting work. How well compensated? I told him about the contracts, the amounts, the timing. Derek whistled softly. That's a lot of money for advice, he said. That's what I thought. Derek, I need a favor. Name it. I need to know more about Mike Donnelly's business practices, specifically whether he's done this before. Done what before? Seduced married women in positions to award him contracts. There was a pause. That's a serious accusation, Adrian. I know, but if I'm right, Vivian isn't his first target. And if she's not his first target, there might be other women who'd be interested to know about his current arrangement. Derek was quiet for a moment. I still have friends on the force, friends who owe me favors. Give me a few days. Thanks. Adrian, be careful. If you're right about this guy, he's not going to appreciate being exposed. I'm counting on it. I hung up and sat in my garage, surrounded by the tools and projects that had always been my refuge. Tomorrow, I'd start the next phase of my plan. Tonight, I just wanted to remember what it felt like to be in control of something, even if it was just my own destruction. Derek called me Monday morning with information that made me freeze. You were right, he said without preamble. Mike Donnelly has a pattern. 3 other women in the past 5 years, all of them in positions to influence business decisions. 2 divorces, 1 woman who transferred to avoid scandal. I gripped the phone tighter. What happened to them? The divorced ones lost everything in the settlements. Their husbands' lawyers found evidence of the affairs and the financial improprieties. The 3rd woman, Sarah Mitchell, she was a city planning commissioner. When her affair with Mike came to light, she resigned and moved to Florida. Jesus. It gets worse. I tracked down the ex-husband of one of the divorced women. Mike didn't just steal his wife, he destroyed his construction business by manipulating city contracts. The guy lost his house, his company, everything. I felt sick. This wasn't just about my marriage. It was about a predator who used women to destroy their husbands' lives for profit. There's more, Derek continued. Sarah Mitchell, the city planning commissioner, she's back in Charlotte. She's been trying to rebuild her career, but Mike's been quietly sabotaging her efforts, spreading rumors, poisoning potential employers against her. Where is she now? Working as a freelance consultant, barely making ends meet. Adrian, this guy isn't just a cheater, he's a sociopath. I thanked Derek and hung up, my mind racing. Vivian thought she was playing Mike, using him for her own advancement, but she was the one being played. Mike wasn't interested in a relationship, he was interested in another victim. That afternoon, I drove to the address Derek had given me for Sarah Mitchell. She lived in a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of Charlotte, a far cry from the executive lifestyle she'd once enjoyed. Sarah was in her early 40s, with graying brown hair and tired eyes that had once probably been beautiful. When I explained who I was and why I was there, she invited me in for coffee. I wondered when someone else would figure out Mike's game, she said, settling into a worn armchair. I tried to warn people, but who's going to believe a disgraced ex-commissioner? Tell me what happened. She did. The story was depressingly familiar. Mike had pursued her aggressively, convinced her that her marriage was holding her back, manipulated her into approving contracts for his clients. When the affair came to light, Mike had disappeared, leaving Sarah to face the scandal alone. The worst part, she said, is that I really thought he loved me. I threw away a 20-year marriage for a man who saw me as nothing more than a business opportunity. Why didn't you expose him? Sarah laughed bitterly. With what? Rain told me what you said to them. You're making a huge mistake, Gray. These are good men who've been helping me become a better person. If you try to destroy them, you'll be destroying me too. I showed the message to Cleo, who snorted with laughter. Oh, honey, you're not destroying her. You're just letting her destroy herself in public. Sometimes the best security isn't a password. It's a public spectacle. The beauty of being a security consultant is that you learn to think like both the defender and the attacker. You spend your days identifying vulnerabilities, mapping out attack vectors, and developing strategies to exploit weaknesses in complex systems. After 20 years in the business, that kind of thinking becomes second nature. You start seeing the world in terms of access points and potential exploits. Rain and Lane had made their first mistake by underestimating me. Their second mistake was not realizing that their entire operation was built on a foundation of digital vulnerabilities that a halfway competent hacker could exploit in about 15 minutes. I spent Thursday morning in my apartment, surrounded by laptops and monitors, doing what I did best: reconnaissance. Rain's Tesla was connected to the internet, because of course it was. Lane's gym had a social media presence that included location tracking and real-time updates. Both men used the same business hotel for their sessions, and that hotel had a guest Wi-Fi network that was about as secure as a screen door. By noon, I had access to Rain's car, Lane's social media accounts, and the hotel's reservation system. By 2 p.m., I'd identified the credit card numbers they used for business expenses, the bank accounts where they deposited their fees, and the phone numbers they used to communicate with clients. The plan I developed was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to destroy them through legal channels, which would take months and might not even work, I was going to destroy them through public humiliation. I was going to use their own technology against them, turn their carefully crafted professional images into sources of embarrassment, and make sure that everyone in their social and professional networks knew exactly what kind of business they were really running. Thursday evening, Rain had a session scheduled with one of his other clients, not Shiloh, according to the calendar I'd hacked from his phone. He was meeting her at the business hotel, same routine he'd been following for months. Predictable, professional, and completely vulnerable to the right kind of technological interference. At 6:45 p.m., I was sitting in the hotel parking lot with a laptop and a directional antenna, watching Rain's Tesla pull into a parking space near the main entrance. He was dressed in his usual expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase that probably contained whatever props he used for his business mentoring sessions. At 6:50 p.m., I activated the exploit I'd developed for his car's entertainment system. The Tesla's stereo system suddenly came to life at maximum volume, playing the audio track I'd extracted from Lane's phone, a recording of one of Shiloh's private sessions that Lane had apparently made for his own entertainment. Shiloh's voice filled the parking lot, along with some very explicit commentary about the services she was receiving and how much better they were than anything she got at home. Rain frantically tried to turn off the stereo, but I'd locked him out of the car's control system. The doors wouldn't open, the windows wouldn't roll down, and the audio kept playing. Other hotel guests started gathering in the parking lot, some of them recording the spectacle with their phones. After 5 minutes of public humiliation, I unlocked the car and watched Rain stumble out, his face red with embarrassment and rage. His client, who had been waiting in the hotel lobby, took one look at the crowd and the phones recording everything and walked quickly back to her own car. Rain's evening was ruined, his professional image was shattered, and the video footage was already being uploaded to social media by helpful bystanders who thought they'd witnessed some kind of bizarre technical malfunction. Friday morning, it was Lane's turn. Lane spent his mornings at an upscale gym downtown, the kind of place where professionals went to maintain their physiques and network with other ambitious people. He had a routine: cardio, weights, protein shake, social media updates about his commitment to physical excellence and personal development. I'd been monitoring his social media for weeks, learning his patterns, identifying his vulnerabilities. Lane was proud of his physique, proud of his gym performance, and very proud of the inspirational content he posted every morning about pushing through barriers and achieving peak performance. At 8 a.m., I was parked outside the gym with Hank, my old friend from the motorcycle club I'd belonged to before I got married and respectable. Hank was 60 years old, built like a refrigerator, and had never met a problem he couldn't solve with the right combination of intimidation and creative property damage. "So this guy's been screwing your wife and charging you for the privilege?" Hank asked, cracking his knuckles. "That's the basic situation, yeah. And you want me to have a friendly conversation with him about his business practices?" "Nothing violent, just educational." Hank's grin was terrifying. "I can be very educational." Lane emerged from the gym at 9:30, dressed in his usual athletic wear, carrying a protein shake and his gym bag. He was walking toward his car, a lifted pickup truck with custom rims and a sound system that probably cost more than most people's cars, when Hank intercepted him. "Excuse me," Hank said, his voice polite but carrying an undertone of menace that made Lane stop walking. "Are you Lane Harlex?" "Yeah, who's asking?" "I'm asking on behalf of a friend whose wife has been taking your coaching sessions. He wanted me to deliver a message." Lane looked around the parking lot, probably calculating his chances of making it to his truck before Hank could catch him. Given that Hank was standing between him and the vehicle, and that Hank was roughly the size and shape of a small building, Lane apparently decided that conversation was the better option. "Look, man, I don't know what your friend told you, but I run a legitimate business. If he's got a problem with his wife's personal development choices, that's between them." Hank nodded thoughtfully. "That's interesting, because my friend seems to think you've been providing some very personal services that go way beyond normal coaching, and he's got documentation to prove it." "Documentation?" I stepped out from behind a nearby car, holding my phone. "Audio recordings, financial records, expense reports, hotel receipts, everything needed to prove that you and Rain have been running a prostitution ring and calling it life coaching." Lane's face went through several interesting color changes. "Gray. I should have known you'd be behind this." "Behind what? I'm just having a conversation with a concerned citizen about your business practices." Hank moved closer to Lane, not threatening exactly, but making it clear that running away wasn't really an option. "Here's the thing, Lane. My friend Gray is a pretty reasonable guy, but he's also got a lot of information that could make your life very difficult. Information that he could share with the police, with your clients' employers, with their husbands, with anyone who might be interested in knowing what kind of services you really provide. What do you want?" I smiled. "I want you to understand that your business model has a fatal flaw. It depends on discretion, on keeping everything quiet and professional. But what happens when that discretion disappears? What happens when everyone knows exactly what you're doing?" As if on cue, several gym members emerged from the building, including a few people I recognized from the local tech community. Lane noticed them too, and his expression grew more desperate. "You can't prove anything illegal," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I don't have to prove anything illegal," I replied. "I just have to prove what you've been doing. And once that information is public, how long do you think it'll take before your other clients disappear, before their husbands start asking questions, before their employers start investigating expense reports?" Hank leaned in closer. "And that's assuming nobody decides to handle this situation more personally." Lane looked back and forth between us, clearly trying to figure out his options. Finally, he seemed to deflate. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to call Rain and tell him that your business partnership is over. I want you to refund every penny you've taken from Shiloh, and I want you to disappear from her life permanently. And if I hear that you're still operating anywhere in this city, I'm going to make sure that everyone you've ever met knows exactly what kind of services you provide." Lane pulled out his phone and made the call while Hank and I listened. The conversation was brief and heated, but the message was clear. Pinnacle Professional Development LLC was officially out of business. After Lane drove away, Hank and I walked back to my truck. "That felt good," Hank said. "Guys like that think they can get away with anything because most people are too embarrassed to fight back." "It's not over yet. Rain's still out there, and he's going to try to salvage the situation somehow." "What's next?" "Next, we let Shiloh's employer know about the expense fraud, and then we sit back and watch everything fall apart." That afternoon, I called Nia and told her it was time to share her folder with Gina Reeves. By 5 p.m., Gina had requested a meeting with the company's CFO and HR director. By 6 p.m., Shiloh had been called into a conference room for what was probably the most uncomfortable conversation of her professional life. I monitored the situation through the smart home system, watching as Shiloh came home early, turned the thermostat up to 92 degrees, and spent 2 hours pacing around the house while making frantic phone calls. The calls to Rain went straight to voicemail. The calls to Lane did the same. The calls to me remained unanswered. At 8 p.m., she sent me a text message. "Gray, please call me. I've been fired. I need to talk to you." I turned off my phone and poured myself a drink. Shiloh always said her career was her baby. I just arranged for a little paternity test. Friday morning brought a knock on my apartment door at 7 a.m. I opened it to find Shiloh standing in the hallway, still wearing yesterday's clothes, looking like she hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup was smeared, and her hands were shaking. "We need to talk," she said. "Do we?" "Gray, please. I know you're angry and I know I screwed up, but what you've done to me is insane. I lost my job. Rain and Lane won't return my calls. I can't access our money, I can't pay the mortgage, and now Gina's telling people that I'm going to be prosecuted for expense fraud." I stepped aside to let her into the apartment, noting how she looked around at the sparse furnishings and beige walls. This wasn't the life she'd expected to be having at 49. "You want some coffee?" I asked. "I want my husband back." "That's interesting, because for the past year it seems like you wanted 2 other men instead." Shiloh sat down on the beige couch and put her head in her hands. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Rain and Lane were helping me figure out what I wanted from life, helping me become more confident and assertive. The physical stuff, that just happened naturally. $18,000 worth of natural. I was going to tell you. I was working up the courage to explain that our marriage wasn't working, that we'd grown apart, that maybe we needed to consider other arrangements." I poured myself coffee and sat down across from her. "Other arrangements like what? An open marriage where I fund your affairs while pretending everything is fine?" "I thought maybe we could work something out. Rain said that a lot of couples find ways to accommodate different needs, that there are arrangements that can work if everyone's honest about what they want." Rain said a lot of things, apparently. Did he also mention that he's been running the same scam on at least a dozen other women? That his life coaching business is actually a high-end escort service? That he and Lane have been documenting their sessions with clients for their own entertainment? Shiloh looked up sharply. "That's not true." I pulled out my phone and played the audio file I'd extracted from Lane's device. Her voice, unmistakably, describing in explicit detail what she wanted from her coaching sessions and how much she was willing to pay for it. The color drained from her face. "Where did you get that?" "Lane recorded it. Probably recorded all of your sessions. Did you know that? Did you know that your private moments were being saved as trophies?" She was quiet for a long time, staring at the phone in my hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me, Gray?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You didn't just cheat on me. You stole from me. You lied to me. You committed fraud against your employer, and you got played by a couple of con artists who saw you coming from a mile away. So what happens now? Now you figure out how to rebuild your life without my help. The divorce papers will be filed next week. You'll get half of what we accumulated during the marriage, minus what you spent on your personal development. The house will have to be sold unless you can qualify for a mortgage on your own, which seems unlikely given your current employment situation. Shiloh started crying, which might have affected me 6 months ago, but now just seemed like another manipulation attempt. Gray, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We've been together for 24 years. That has to count for something. It does count for something. It counts as 24 years of my life that I'm never getting back. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Gina Reeves's number. Gray, this is Gina. I'm calling because we're having a board meeting this afternoon about Shiloh's situation, and I wanted to give you a heads up about what's going to happen. I put the call on speaker so Shiloh could hear. The company's going to file criminal charges for the expense fraud. We've identified over $30,000 in questionable expenses over the past 18 months, and the evidence is pretty clear that she was using company funds for personal services. Shiloh's face went white. 30,000? We also discovered that she was claiming tax deductions for business expenses that were actually payments to Pinnacle Professional Development, which means there are potential tax fraud issues as well. The IRS will probably want to take a look at her returns for the past few years. I looked at Shiloh, who was staring at the phone like it was a snake. Gina, thanks for the call. I appreciate the heads up. There's one more thing. The board wants to know if you have any additional information about Pinnacle Professional Development or the services they were providing. Apparently, there are other employees who may have been using similar services, and we want to make sure we identify all the potential liability. I'll send you everything I have. After I hung up, Shiloh was completely silent. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. She wasn't just looking at divorce and unemployment. She was looking at criminal charges and potential prison time. Gray, she said finally, I need help. I need a lawyer. I need someone who understands financial crimes. You need to take responsibility for your choices. But you could help me. You could tell them that you knew about the expenses, that you approved them, that this was all a misunderstanding. I laughed, and the sound was harsh enough to make her flinch. You want me to commit perjury to save you from the consequences of your own actions? I want you to remember that you love me. I did love you. Past tense. The woman I loved wouldn't have done what you did. Shiloh stood up abruptly, her sadness transforming into anger. You self-righteous bastard. You think you're so much better than me? You think you've never made mistakes? I've made plenty of mistakes, but I never stole money to fund an affair. I never lied to my spouse for over a year, and I never got so desperate for validation that I paid strangers to make me feel special. Rain and Lane weren't strangers. They were helping me discover who I really am, what I really want from life. What you really are is a middle-aged woman who got conned by a couple of predators. What you really want is someone else to pay for your mistakes. Shiloh's anger flared into rage. You know what, Gray? I'm glad I had an affair. I'm glad I found men who actually wanted to spend time with me, who made me feel desirable and interesting and alive, because you sure as hell weren't doing any of that. You're right. I wasn't. Because I was too busy working 60-hour weeks to pay for the lifestyle you demanded while you were off discovering yourself with your paid companions. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. This isn't over, Gray. I'm going to fight the criminal charges, I'm going to contest the divorce, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of vindictive, controlling bastard you really are. Good luck with that. I'm sure your legal team will be very impressed by your defense strategy. After she left, I sat in my apartment for a while, thinking about the conversation and what came next. Shiloh was right about one thing. This wasn't over. She was going to fight, and that meant I needed to be prepared for whatever desperate moves she might make. My phone buzzed with a text from Cleo. Heard through the grapevine that Rain's been asking around about you. Word is he's planning something for tonight. You might want to watch your back. I texted back. Where? Blue Heron. He's been telling people he's going to set the record straight about what really happened with his business. Sounds like he's planning some kind of public confrontation. I smiled. A public confrontation was exactly what I'd been hoping for. That evening, I walked into the Blue Heron to find it more crowded than I'd ever seen it. Word had apparently gotten around that there was going to be some kind of showdown, and the local tech community had turned out in force to watch the spectacle. Rain was holding court at the bar, dressed in an expensive suit, surrounded by people who were listening to his version of events with varying degrees of skepticism. He was playing the victim, talking about how he'd been targeted by a jealous husband who couldn't handle his wife's personal growth. "The truth is," he was saying as I approached, "Gray Merrickson is a controlling, abusive husband who couldn't stand the fact that his wife was becoming more independent and confident. When she started working with professional coaches to improve her life, he sabotaged her career and destroyed our business out of pure spite." The crowd turned to look at me as I walked up to the bar. Cleo was working, and she slid a beer across to me with a knowing look. "That's an interesting story, Rain," I said. "Is that the same story you're going to tell the police when they start investigating Pinnacle professional development?" Rain's confident smile faltered slightly. "There's nothing for them to investigate. We ran a legitimate coaching business." "Did you?" "Because I've got documentation showing that you and Lane charged clients for private services while claiming to provide business mentoring. I've got audio recordings of your sessions, financial records showing how you structured payments to avoid taxes, and testimony from multiple clients about what kind of services you actually provided." The crowd was listening intently now, phones out, recording everything. This was exactly the kind of drama that would be all over social media within the hour. "You're lying," Rain said, but his voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone and played the same audio file I'd played for Shiloh that morning. Her voice filled the bar, describing in explicit detail what she wanted from her coaching sessions and how much she was willing to pay for it. The reaction from the crowd was immediate. Gasps, nervous laughter, whispered conversations. Rain's face went red with embarrassment and anger. "That's private," he said. "You had no right to record that." "I didn't record it. Lane did. Apparently he liked to keep trophies of his sessions with clients. Did you know that, Rain? Did you know your business partner was documenting everything you did?" Rain looked around the bar, realizing that his attempt to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly. The crowd was no longer sympathetic. They were disgusted. "This is harassment," he said. "I'm going to call the police." "Please do. I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing about your business model, especially when they find out that some of your clients were using company money to pay for your services." I turned to address the crowd directly. "For anyone who's interested, Rain Morin and Lane Harlex have been running a prostitution ring disguised as a life coaching business. They target married women who are feeling neglected or underappreciated, offer them emotional and physical validation, and then charge premium rates for services that definitely aren't covered by professional coaching certifications." The crowd was buzzing now, people pulling out their phones to look up Pinnacle professional development, sharing information, connecting dots. Rain's reputation was being destroyed in real time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "You always said I never fought for you," I said, looking directly at Rain. "Well, now I'm fighting, and I'm going to make sure that everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of business you were really running." Rain tried to push through the crowd toward the exit, but people were blocking his way, asking questions, demanding answers. His carefully crafted professional image was crumbling, and the video footage of his meltdown was already being uploaded to social media. I finished my beer and walked out of the bar, leaving Rain to deal with the consequences of his choices. Outside, the night air was cool and clean, and I felt lighter than I had in months. My phone buzzed with a text from Nia. "Board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. They want you to testify about what you know. This is going to be huge." I texted back, "I'll be there." Sometimes silence is the loudest revenge. The boardroom at Shiloh's former company was all glass walls and polished surfaces, the kind of corporate environment designed to make everyone feel like they were part of something important and professional. At 9 a.m. sharp, I was sitting at a conference table surrounded by executives, lawyers, and HR representatives, all of them very interested in what I had to say about Pinnacle professional development and my wife's financial arrangements. Gina Reeves was leading the meeting, her satisfaction barely concealed as she laid out the scope of what they'd discovered. Over the past 18 months, we've identified $37,000 in questionable expenses submitted by Shiloh Ravelin. All of these expenses were categorized as professional development and business coaching, but the evidence suggests they were actually payments for personal services of a nature. The company's CFO, a stern-looking man in his 60s, was reviewing the folder that Naya had compiled. Mr. Merrickson, you've provided us with extensive documentation about these services. Can you walk us through what you discovered and how you obtained this information? I spent the next hour laying out everything I'd learned about Rain and Lane's operation. The fake business credentials, the hotel arrangements, the network of clients, the audio recordings, the financial structures they used to avoid taxes and maintain the appearance of legitimacy. The lawyers were taking notes furiously, and I could see them calculating the potential liability exposure. Not just for Shiloh's fraud, but for the company's failure to properly oversee expense reporting, and the possibility that other employees had been involved in similar arrangements. Mr. Merrickson, the HR director asked, do you believe that Ms. Ravelin understood that what she was doing constituted fraud against the company? I believe she understood exactly what she was doing. The expenses were carefully categorized to make them appear legitimate. The payments were structured to stay under reporting thresholds, and she went to considerable lengths to hide the true nature of the services she was receiving. And you had no knowledge of these arrangements until you accidentally discovered her scheduling file? None whatsoever. I was completely unaware that she was having an affair, much less that she was using company funds to pay for it. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, with the lawyers asking increasingly detailed questions about dates, amounts, and specific services. By the time it was over, it was clear that Shiloh was facing serious criminal charges and that the company was preparing to pursue both criminal prosecution and civil recovery. As I was leaving the building, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered it anyway. Mr. Merrickson? This is Detective Sarah Chen with the Financial Crimes Unit. I understand you have information about a business called Pinnacle Professional Development that we might be interested in. I do. Would you be available to come in and make a formal statement? We've received several complaints about this organization, and your information might help us build a comprehensive case. When do you need me? How about this afternoon? 2 o'clock? The police station was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lights, institutional furniture, and the kind of atmosphere that made everyone feel like they were in trouble, even when they weren't. Detective Chen was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who clearly understood financial crimes and had no patience for people who thought they were too clever to get caught. Mr. Merrickson, I want you to know that you're not under investigation here. We're treating you as a victim of fraud, and we appreciate your cooperation in helping us understand how this organization operated. She walked me through the same information I'd presented to the corporate board, but with a focus on the criminal aspects of what Rain and Lane had been doing. Tax evasion, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. The list of potential charges was extensive. How many other victims are we talking about? I asked. Based on what we've uncovered so far, at least 20 women over the past 3 years. The total amount of money involved is probably close to $500,000, and that's just what we can document. The real number is probably much higher. What happens to my wife? Detective Chen's expression was sympathetic, but professional. That depends on how cooperative she is and whether she's willing to testify against Morin and Harlex. The expense fraud charges are pretty straightforward, but if she helps us build cases against the main perpetrators, The prosecutor might be willing to work with her on a plea agreement. After I finished at the police station, I drove to the Blue Heron for a drink and some time to process everything that had happened. The bar was quieter than it had been the night before, but there was still an undercurrent of excitement as people discussed the previous evening's confrontation. Cleo was working the afternoon shift, and she poured me a whiskey without being asked. "Heard you had a busy morning," she said. "Corporate board meeting and police interview. Not exactly how I planned to spend my Friday. Any word on what's happening with Rain and Lane?" "Police are building cases against them. Sounds like they've been running this scam for years, and there are a lot more victims than I realized." Cleo nodded. "Guys like that always think they're smarter than everyone else. They get away with it for a while, and then they get sloppy and overconfident." My phone buzzed with a text from Shiloh. "Gray, I need to talk to you. The police want me to testify against Rain and Lane. My lawyer says I need to cooperate if I want to avoid prison time." I showed the message to Cleo, who raised an eyebrow. "She's finally figuring out how much trouble she's in," Cleo said. "Looks like it." I texted back, "What do you want from me?" The response came immediately. "I want to know if you'll support me if I testify. I want to know if there's any chance we can work things out." I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened over the past week. The betrayal, the lies, the financial fraud, the public humiliation, the 24 years of marriage that had led to this moment. Finally, I typed back, "The divorce papers will be filed Monday. Your cooperation with the police is between you and your lawyer. We have nothing left to work out." The response took longer this time. "I understand. I'm sorry, Gray. For all of it." I turned off my phone and finished my whiskey. Outside, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. It was the kind of evening that might have been beautiful if I'd been in the mood to appreciate it. "You okay?" Cleo asked. "I will be." "What's next for you?" I thought about it. The apartment, the divorce, the new life I was going to have to build from scratch at 52 years old. I'm thinking about starting my own security consulting firm, specializing in helping people protect themselves from exactly the kind of scam that Rain and Lane were running. Cleo's smile was approving. That sounds like a good way to turn a bad experience into something useful. That's the idea. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new office, a small space above a coffee shop downtown, when Detective Chen called with an update. "Thought you'd want to know that we arrested Morin and Harlex this morning. Grand jury returned indictments on multiple counts of fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. We're looking at serious prison time for both of them." "What about the other victims?" "Most of them are cooperating with the prosecution, your wife included. She's agreed to testify in exchange for a plea deal on the expense fraud charges, probably looking at probation and restitution rather than prison time." "And their business?" "Completely shut down. We've seized their assets, frozen their accounts, and made sure they can't operate under any other names. They're done." After I hung up, I sat in my office for a while, looking out the window at the street below. People walking by, living their lives, dealing with their own problems and challenges. Most of them probably thought they were too smart to get conned, too careful to fall for the kind of scam that had destroyed my marriage. But I knew better now. I knew that everyone was vulnerable to the right kind of manipulation, that everyone had weaknesses that could be exploited by people who were patient and clever enough to find them. That's why I was in business now, not just to help companies protect their data and systems, but to help individuals protect themselves from the kind of predators who specialized in emotional and financial exploitation. My first client was a woman whose husband had been targeted by a business mentor who was remarkably similar to Rain Morin. My second was a man whose wife had been convinced to invest their retirement savings in a life coaching program that promised to transform their marriage. The work was satisfying in a way that corporate security consulting had never been. I wasn't just protecting abstract systems and data, I was helping real people avoid the kind of devastation that I'd experienced. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a letter from Shiloh. She was living in a small apartment across town, working as a receptionist at a medical office, trying to rebuild her life after losing everything she'd thought was important. The letter was an apology mostly, an acknowledgement of what she'd done, an explanation of how she'd gotten caught up in Rain and Lane's manipulation, a recognition that her choices had consequences that extended far beyond her own life. She didn't ask for forgiveness, which was good because I wasn't ready to offer it. She didn't ask for reconciliation, which was even better because that ship had sailed permanently. She just wanted me to know that she understood what had happened and that she was trying to become a better person. I read the letter once and then filed it away. Not because I was holding on to anger or resentment, but because it represented a chapter of my life that was definitively closed. The man who had been married to Shiloh Ravelin for 24 years was gone, replaced by someone who understood that trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. The new Gray Merrickson was harder, more cynical, less willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, but he was also more honest, more self-reliant, and less vulnerable to the kind of manipulation that had destroyed his marriage. A year after everything started, I was having a drink at the Blue Heron when Cleo asked me if I ever regretted how I'd handled the situation. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd tried to work things out instead of going for total destruction?" she asked. I thought about it. Sometimes. But then I remember that working things out would have required me to accept that my wife had been lying to me for over a year, stealing money to fund an affair, and planning to continue the arrangement indefinitely. It would have required me to pretend that none of that mattered. And you couldn't do that? I couldn't do that. Some things can't be forgiven, and some relationships can't be saved. The trick is knowing the difference. Cleo nodded. Fair enough. And you're happy with how things turned out? I looked around the bar, at the people talking and laughing and living their lives. I thought about my business, my apartment, my new understanding of who I was and what I was capable of. I'm not happy, I said, but I'm free, and sometimes that's more important. The next morning, I got a call from a potential client, a man whose wife had started working with a relationship coach who was charging $5,000 for a weekend intensive program. The story sounded familiar, and I found myself smiling as I scheduled the consultation. Some people never learn. But fortunately for my business, there are always people like me who are willing to help them figure it out the hard way. I hung up the phone and got back to work. There were vulnerabilities to identify, attack vectors to map, and predators to expose. It was exactly the kind of work I was meant to be doing. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building a better life from the wreckage of the old one and helping other people do the same.